Cheers, my AKA Padders. Guys, we have something special today, and welcome to Sunday Presentation. This is where I bring you what's been on the tip of my brain throughout the week. Just as like a dump, you know, let's sit down, let's watch something comic book, let's watch something cool, and let's talk about it. And I do want to discuss everything you guys are about to see. We gotta go back in time. We gotta go back to 2003. The Daredevil movie, it does well, but it doesn't like hit this Spider-Man like stratosphere. It doesn't like destroy the box office. It doesn't become king of the hill. These were a lot of the unrealistic expectations of all comic book movies around this time. The reason is because the Spider-Man money, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man money, it's too sweet not to pursue. So it gets pursued, and then we get a little bit of a superhero lull until Iron Man, launching the Marvel Cinematic Universe drops. So 2003, and then we get this Daredevil DVD drop. Daredevil finally comes out on DVD, and finally we get this like rumored extended edition, this rumored director's cut. The director's cut, the way we track the court case alone, it just adds more body, adds a little bit more context to the movie. That director's cut of Daredevil, in my view, is fantastic. But on this DVD drop that we all flocked to, because it was the only live-action Daredevil outside of Daredevil's appearance on the Incredible Hulk TV show, here we document that Daredevil is a creator character. Creators are drawn and they flock to Daredevil. We make the arguments on this channel that X-Men should be the franchise of the artist. Whoever is the up-and-coming top best artist in the industry needs to be on X-Men. It's a good barrier, right? Daredevil is like some of the polar opposite of that, where Daredevil is of the writer, Daredevil's of the intellect, Daredevil is of faith and emotion and connection to our parents and the dirt and the grime of Hell's Kitchen. These notes of the character, they resonate, and they have different interpretations from creator to creator. And we see that in this documentary. And the giant crushing revelation I had while I was compiling all of this and watching it for all of you, because earlier this week I did a John Romita Jr. video that, it was just a JR showcase that no one even cared to check out. Is that we don't have anything comparable to this right now. Like, we want to discuss the fall of the American comic book industry, and we try and classify it in like kind of ludicrous ways, like low hanging fruit, low energy ways. We want to classify it that American comic books need to be more like manga, whatever the hell that means. Or American comic books need to be less woke or less LGBTQ plus. These ideas, right? They're ludicrous ideas. Some of the real pure reasoning to the fall of the American comic book industry is something like this. Daredevil was a character. Daredevil was transformed. And because of that transformation, the best of the best had to touch him. And when they did, it was a comic book event. You didn't even have to advertise it. People showed up for it. There's no character right now that has this level of reverence, right? Like, there's nothing that inspires the creator. There's no character that inspires the creator right now. That's troubling.
Comic books have got a very strange self-esteem issue.
Now maybe I ought to start being intense. I hate Miller being more intense than I am.
I call my style the deadline style. Whatever comes out on time, that's my style.
He's cashing a check and I'm sitting there doing the work at 3 in the morning. It was my normal grumble.
Hate me, that's fine. Just be passionate. Love me, just be passionate about it. Don't be lukewarm. Don't tell me you want to see other guys.
Daredevil has always kind of been the Grateful Dad of comics.
So I was on board, you know, from the get-go.
But I wanted them to take it seriously, because I took it seriously.
Worked out pretty good. 10-year overnight success, that's how it works, yeah.
I wanted something for Bill Everett to do. When we first did Daredevil, I said to myself, here's Bill, who had created the Submariner. He's one of the great talents in our business. And as far as I know, he isn't doing anything. I've got to dream something up for him. And a number of people had written articles in different papers and magazines about the fact that all of our heroes, all the ones that I had come up with, were flawed. So I thought, well, I got to find a guy with another flaw. That seems to be what turns people on. Strangely enough, I was afraid that there might be a negative reaction to a blind superhero, primarily among blind people. I felt they would feel, you know, what's this guy trying to do? We can't do things like that. Is this some sort of a parody? And I was nervous about it. And then I was amazed to find we got more fan mail in the beginning from charities for the blind. They said that the people that we're involved with are so grateful that there is a blind superhero, and they love that idea. And oh man, what a relief that was for me. It felt good to get that kind of mail. It's a funny thing about Daredevil's costume. It started out being yellow. And I really am no authority on what color costumes should be. I used to leave that really to the people who did the coloring in our office. And a lot of people said, we don't like the yellow costume. So being a man who makes very profound decisions, I said, okay, how about red? Now that I hate to disillusion people, but that is the amount of intensive study and thought and research and focus group meetings that we had in determining a color of a costume. People have said to me, did you ever imagine that Daredevil would last for 40 years? In all honesty, I never thought about it with any of our characters, because it's hard to describe, but in the days that we were doing all these superheroes, when we started them, all that we were concerned about was that the books would sell. So we were so involved and occupied with making every issue as good or better than the last, that the thought of what will these be like in 40 years, it never occurred to me, and I doubt that any of the guys was thinking of it at that time. What I always tried to do with Marvel was make it seem like a club, like an inner group that we knew about and the outside world wasn't even aware of. If you read Marvel, you were on the inside, you were hip. And it was sort of an exclusive thing, limited just to Marvel readers. And I tried to talk to the readers as if they were friends, not readers, so that not only, hopefully, did they enjoy the stories, but they enjoyed being part of the Marvel mystique, you might say. And I'm probably making it sound much more profound than it really was, but that's the way I looked at it. I wanted people to be aware of Marvel, and I wanted people to know about the mysticism and the magic and the marvelness of Marvel. And they say if you build a better mousetrap, The world will be the path to your door, but the world will only do that if it knows the mousetrap exists. And I didn't want us to be doing these books in a vacuum, because, you know, comic books had no advertising budget, no promotion. There were no ads on television, on the radio, in newspapers. You just printed your comic book and it was out there. And I was sort of like Joan of Arc. I was on a crusade, a mission, to let the world know about the marvelous world of Marvel. So in that sense, I guess I was a little bit of a huckster. To me, placing the dialogue balloons was very important because it's part of the artwork. A lot of people don't realize that. They just shove the dialogue wherever they have room. But here's a panel with an illustration, and you have space that's empty and space that's filled with line work. When you put a dialogue balloon in with a pointer or a sound effect or a caption along the top or the side or the bottom, you're contributing to the artwork. That, in essence, becomes part of the illustration. I spent more time deciding where the dialogue balloons would go than I spent writing the dialogue. Writing the dialogue was easy. Sometimes I couldn't put too much humor in the story itself because it was a highly dramatic story and you don't want to break the mood. But I tried in things like the credits, and I wrote all those things. I wouldn't let anybody else touch them for years. Every credit was different than the one before, and I think I had more fun dreaming up those little gags for all the credits than anything else that I did, because I love writing humor. One thing I tried to do was always use a normal vocabulary in our stories. If I wanted to use a word like cataclysmic, or any word that belonged, I would. And it occurred to me that if kids were interested in a story and they came across a word that they didn't understand, they would learn what it meant just through its use in the sentence, by osmosis, so to speak. Or if they had to go to the dictionary and look it up, that's not the worst thing that could happen. I was one of the luckiest guys in the world because I worked with the most talented artists you could ever find anywhere. Colan, Romita, Bill Everett, Wally Wood. I don't think I worked with Frank Miller. I think he came along after I left. And that's a lasting regret of mine because he too is wonderful. But we at Marvel were indeed fortunate. We had the best artists. I would give them just a notion of a plot, and they went off and running, and they would illustrate it. And it was a great working arrangement.
I told Stan that I was tired of penciling. I thought I was burned out. In 1965, I thought I was finished. And I said, "Oh, ink, I can help you that way. If you give me pencils, I can polish them up a little bit." So first thing he did was pull out a Daredevil assignment and said, could I help him out in an emergency? And I was a sap my whole life. I was what I call a good soldier. And I said, sure, if you need help, I'll help you out with that. Fully expecting I'll go back to inking after I finish this one Daredevil story. Of course, that lasted 6 months, I think. I did Daredevil, and I started to like it, thanks to Jack Kirby's indoctrination with breakdowns. This is the original black and white art, penciled by me, written by Stan Lee, and then inked by me. This is the first splash I did in Daredevil. When I brought in that pencil, Stan accepted this splash, but the pages immediately following it were a little bit quiet and slow moving. So Jack Kirby was called and inducted into the sequence. Stan Lee had elevated the art of communicating with the readers on a page called the bullpen page. He was apologizing, if you read it, for the slowness of the start. But just wait till you get to page 3. That's where Jack Kirby took over. This is the Jack Kirby influence. In other words, instead of taking his clothes off and neatly folding them and putting them on a rack, he takes his clothes off, he quickly gets dressed, he prepares, and he leaps out the window without even looking. And he just hopes he's going to find a flagpole or something to land on. Almost immediately after seeing the way he paced it, how nothing is slow moving. Everything is quick, bang, bang, bang. I caught on almost immediately. Stan didn't have enough time to script all of these things in advance, otherwise he would have. So what he did was he would verbally or quickly dash out a half a page plot and send it to the artist. Mostly it was verbal, I think, just for time's sake. And the artist then would decide what to make a splash scene and how to introduce the characters and how to unfold the story, which was at first terrified me. But almost immediately, maybe in a month or two, I realized, holy mackerel, this is a much better way to do it. Comics succeeded despite doing it the wrong way. It should have always been done visually. Once we made it a visual medium, two things happened. Every artist had his own approach to storytelling, so you had more variety, instead of having a writer's personal approach. Secondly, Stan Lee discovered that after he had the silent drawings, he could now add balloons where he didn't expect to be able to add them. Sound effects could come anywhere he wanted. So he gained freedom. We gained freedom, albeit we gained a lot of time-consuming responsibility, but it also was much more gratifying, and we were able to put our stamp on the thing, and it was wonderful. If anything made comics boom, I think it was that accident of expediency. The Kingpin is my favorite creation. Stan's procedure used to be, he would leave me a little card on my drawing table saying next month the character is going to be called the Kingpin. That's all. No description, no limitations. The sky was the limit. All the criminals, master criminals that Ditko and Jack Kirby had created had a similarity. They were all lean, mean-looking, mustached, with a felt hat and a striped suit. That what I would call the established criminal type. So when he said the Kingpin of crime, I immediately was looking for the most different look that I could. So I fashioned him after a Wall Street tycoon baron type. John Jr.'s run on Daredevil is probably one of the most satisfying things that ever happened, because it turns out that I worked on Daredevil for a short period of time, but I felt like it was mine. He then took a run on it, quite a run. The thing with John Jr. is I didn't have to critique him, because the thing that mattered most was storytelling, which was natural to him. And that comes about from the fact that when I started Daredevil, he was about 9 or 10 years old. And we were plotting stories as a family. So help me, when we would drive driving to Cape Cod one time, 5 or 6 hours in the car, we were plotting Daredevil stories. He loved it. He took off. He started drawing immediately. From the time he was 10 years old till he was about 15, he just did a million drawings, never showed me one. Never showed me one. He said it wasn't ready for me to look at yet. He said, when it's good, I'll let you see it. And I never intruded. I had known that parents can kill a spark faster than anybody by overzealous following and informing and advising. No, I didn't want to do that. So after 6 months, I was in love with Daredevil. And Stan, he asked me, you know, in the 3rd or 4th month, I did a Spider-Man as a guest star. He was trying me out for Spider-Man without my knowledge. So suddenly he comes to me and said, do you think you could do Spider-Man on a monthly basis? And I said, I guess so, but I like to do Daredevil. And he said, Steve Ditko's leaving Spider-Man, would you mind? And I figured, all right, I'll help him out with this. Again, the sap was there. And I really hoped I could get back to Daredevil. Somebody had told me that Daredevil's sales had improved while I was on it. And I was feeling great. I was saying, hey, wouldn't it be nice if I could move Daredevil up to be one of the top sellers? But I never had a chance to find out. So that run on Daredevil was like a blissful period of 6 months that I enjoyed myself tremendously. I loved that character. I still to this day think Daredevil's the best character Marvel has.
Hi, my name is Gene Colan, and welcome to my studio. I was on Daredevil for approximately 6 years. I enjoyed it, every bit of it. It was getting to the point, though, where it was getting very difficult to keep choreographing the same fight scenes and have them look different. And sometimes I would bring it up to Stan, why are there so many fights in all these stories? Why can't we get away from it? He says, because this is what the fans really want to see. I kept it fresh and original by approaching it each time as if it were the first time. Each time I got a story, and each time I handed a story in, I got another one, it was always uppermost in my mind as to how different can I make this one, and this one, and so on. And as they came in, it was almost like an assembly line. But I just threw myself into it, lived another life in a sense. I tried to get into that story myself. I tried to jump into the page and try to imagine what it would be like to see it visually as an outsider. What am I looking for? What am I trying to capture? If there was a fight scene, I would try to do it in a way that would confuse the reader. Because in real life, very often you don't see the details. You just see action, and you don't see things flying much else but arms and legs and people sailing over tables, but you don't see the details. And very often it's done in a dark room where you can even see less. But it's exciting. It's more dramatic that way. It keeps the viewer on edge. I wanted the story to be sort of mystifying and sinister. I was working for the older crowd, and I probably didn't know it. I was really working for myself. I had such a good time doing what I wanted to do and telling a story the way I wanted to tell it. I didn't want to tell it the simplest way. I wanted to be confusing, and I wanted to be complex, and I wanted the reader to think about it a little bit, take it seriously, even though it's not a thing to take seriously, but I wanted them to take it seriously, because I took it seriously. You have to really love what you're doing, above and beyond anything else. It's just something you're drawn to, literally drawn to, and whether you get paid or not get paid. And for anyone that wants to study art or go into art as a profession, if they're not passionate about it, the chances are they're not going to be that successful about it either. My feeling about what I'm doing, the love that I have for it, how dramatic and how believable I want to make it to the readers, gets right into the artwork. It's an unconscious thing. And that's how a style, I believe, is developed too. That's an unconscious thing. When you have developed a style, it's as recognizable as your handwriting. Same thing. But to be successful in art or any other field, you have to really love it and be totally devoted to it. Unfortunately, especially in my business, a family life is missed. It's a sad thing, but you're not really with your family that much. You're married to your art. And I have some regrets about that, and there's nothing I can do about it. I did the best that I could, but my art seemed to come ahead of everything. Maybe that's what makes for the artist. And it meant nothing to me to stay up until, say, 3 or 4 in the morning to complete what I had to complete until it was right. Artists are very self-centered people. They love what they do to the exclusion of just about everything else. They kind of live in a bubble, at least the comic book artists do. I can't continue the same pace. I'm 76 now, and I just can't keep up with it. I don't have that kind of energy, but I still do it. I love doing it, and whenever I can, I do. But I'm trying to make up for the things that I didn't do also. I pay a little more attention to my children, certainly to my wife, who is 75% of the reason I'm still here. I'm very grateful to them.
What I'm after when I draw my pictures is I'm after your guts. I want you to feel something. I don't want you to like me necessarily. It's like the same with my characters. And what I'm after when I draw is evocation. It's not pretty. I love beauty. I don't care about pretty. I got to draw a couple of issues of the secondary Spider-Man title. They've guest starred this character, Daredevil, that I'd never really paid much attention to. I mean, I'd read the old Stan Lee, Gene Colan issues, and I really enjoyed them, but I had never thought of this guy as a major player. And this guy, Daredevil, I kind of dug him because, well, how many superheroes are known for what they can't do? I mean, Superman can fly and lift up buildings and all of that. Batman's ridiculously smart and he's got all the technology in the world. And Spider-Man can spin webs and swing across buildings. Daredevil, he's blind. He can't see. That's his distinguishing feature. I fell in love. This guy was perfect. He could be the perfect hard-boiled superhero. Along the way, I decided he had to be a Catholic because only a Catholic could be a vigilante and an attorney at the same time. So I think religion and politics both have a very profound relation to comics because cartooning is taking reality and making it more so. It's like Hitchcock said about melodrama, is reality with all the boring parts taken out. There was a lot of ruckus when I was working on Daredevil as it found its voice, because the violence was so harsh, and because people were getting cut up. Mostly it was the harshness of it, the way that had a strong reaction from people, because it was as if I brought whiskey into a playground or something. In comics, in comic books, in superhero comics, people have wasted an awful lot of creative energy and hard work looking for kids who aren't there. The audience who read Daredevil was not juvenile. They weren't. And I got this character who'd been pretty, I mean, I think even the most generous people would call it a grade B character. He was the poor man's Spider-Man. And everybody knew that. But I kind of saw this guy as being something much cooler. Matt's been the guy I punish for all my mistakes and sins. Because he really is, he is a flawed hero. In that he's a man who intends to do good and causes much damage. Matt should have been a villain. He had a horrible childhood. His romantic life is the worst. Oh, sure, the girls look great, but they ended up dead or killing him or something. But somehow this guy redeems himself and moves ahead. He just doesn't give up. He's just like his dad. With Born Again, what I was really at, it was I think the first of a series of works that I've been involved with, where I've looked at taking the machinery of the hero apart and putting it back together in leaner form, so it was more pure. An awful lot of the conventions of the superheroes comes from the fear that was generated in the 1950s by the Senate hearings and the Comics Code and all that censorious nonsense. In Born Again, I really wanted to just say, okay, once and for all, I know you guys were moving fast. I mean, I know you guys, I know Stan, Bill, Stan Lee, Bill Everett, Wally Wood, all the rest. I know we all have to work for a living, and I know you kind of bashed this one out, okay? But let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at what works. And the Catholicism angle worked. And the senses work. I mean, Daredevil is by far one of the sexiest hero in comics. But beyond that, this lawyer vigilante thing, I mean, it's always been shaky. It's a fun contradiction, but it's a contradiction. And so I thought, break it down, destroy him. And then have the real deep hero emerge. And what I thought was the winning idea was I got rid of the costume for a good long time. And so that he wasn't wearing the tights, and you realize the hero wasn't the costume. The costume was just dressing around the hero. I introduced Elektra in the first issue of Daredevil that I wrote. I had been waiting to bring her in. I thought there was something stupid about the way superheroes always had these normal girls for girlfriends. Why? I mean, why would there be a Lois Lane to Superman? Why wouldn't he be running around with Wonder Woman? I mean, she can match him. Why wouldn't these people be operatic in their romance the way they are in their combat? I mean, is there anything more insipid than seeing some superhero in a love scene and all of a sudden he's just another guy who looks like us in a bed naked? No, these people bring down buildings with their passion. That's what they do with their fights. And Daredevil needed a romance that was worthy of him, of his passion and his physicality. And Elektra is such a good Greek myth from the house of Atreus. Agamemnon is her dad and is a vengeful force. And also, come on, Freud named a complex after her. I mean, she's got issues. And I just expanded upon that. And also, I mean, it was just an exploration of what I guess superhero sex would be like. I've been writing Daredevil for a few months when I told him I wanted to steal the Kingpin away from Spider-Man. And that was risible at Marvel. Like, who the hell wants the Kingpin? He was the Jackie Gleason of supervillains. I mean, he might as well have been called Fat Man, because what he mainly did was he used his belly to fight Spider-Man. He was not known as the most brilliant achievement of the Stan Lee regime, okay? But he was just what I needed, because I needed a gang lord. And my colleague John Byrne took me aside at one point, and you know, as he was doing his X-Men run, and we were just having a ball being rivals at the time, and he said, "You know what you got to do?" He said, "You got to do this. You draw this guy the way he's been drawn for the whole first issue he's in." And I went, "Yeah." John was older and entered the field earlier than I did, and he said, "Then you turn him into a Frank Miller character. Light him. You're the guy who does the lighting." And he gave me a wonderful moment, which is where the Kingpin goes from being this line clear guy, you know, visually conceived by John Romita, who has one of the most beautiful lines that the field has ever seen. And then I have him light up a cigarette, and all of a sudden he was mine. There's a tension with the Kingpin, Bullseye, and Elektra and Daredevil that all was a psychodrama. Bullseye is the ultimate bad boy. He's a psychopathic killer, yes. But he's really good at it, and he's really smart. The final act of the Elektra story had to involve him. And she had to be cruelly and coldly murdered by the worst possible enemy Daredevil ever had, because it was his ultimate humiliation. Along with losing the love of his life, he also, it was in such foul circumstance that the man was mocking her as he murdered her. And I don't think the symbolism of that sigh going through her was lost on much anybody. I mean, it was a rape murder in a superhero comic. It's pretty weird. To this day, I'm still surprised that Marvel was able to just say, okay. And in comics, you can't waste time. Comics exist in time. The reader is moving through time. It's not gallery work. And so you have to know how to produce it expeditiously, because that's where comics gain their energy. That's what makes them sexy. That's what makes them fun, is that they don't slow down in an artistic sense. Everything is narrative. What's done by the hand in comics is something that movies cannot approach. we've felt so long like we were like the retarded little bastard nephew of media that we've forgotten that we're better at certain things than they are. And then yeah, movies are much better at a bunch of things. Movies are much more powerful. Movies control pace. A cartoonist has to be really smart to slow you down. A filmmaker just has to leave the camera where it is for a long time. And it's a different set of virtues and weaknesses. So yeah, I came in wanting to make comics more cinematic. I stay in wanting to make them less so.
I first became the artist on Daredevil because I had gotten either kicked off or I quit the X-Men. And I had this crossroads in my mind where I didn't know if I wanted to be a cartoonist anymore. I was really fed up with the industry. And it wasn't because of comics itself, it was personalities. The guys I was dealing with were boneheads, to say the least. At any rate, Ralph Macchio asked me if I wanted to do Daredevil. Simple as that. He said it's a great character, and he says you can do full pencils and do your own storytelling, play to your strength. And that was it. It was simple as that. I was ready to walk from the industry at that time. So it was a nice, and that actually, to me, is a turning point in my so-called comic books career. I was ready to go at that point. Then working on Daredevil, I suddenly got invigorated and improved from then on. And I think it's got to do with the character. It's a very graceful character, as opposed, it's the opposite of Spider-Man, who's awkward and gawky. But it's a graceful character, and the costume reveals a nice amount of muscle tone that you can play with. And it's a simple costume with the 2 Ds. And I actually picked that character to be the most fun to draw out of all the characters I've drawn, more than Spider-Man. Although the Punisher is a close second because it reminds me of my uncle. The differences between my father drawing Daredevil and me drawing Daredevil is he's just a better artist than I am. I remember seeing it vividly, the first things he did when I was a kid, they stuck in my head, and he explained things to me. This guy's a blind lawyer. Wow, he's blind? I mean, being a kid at that age, anything that is different was fun, and the fact that this guy's a superhero, surrounded by a whole bunch of guys, and not only that, but he's blind, I got to hear more about this guy. So in my mind, it started out as my father. By the time I got to the end of my hand, it was me. The only pressure I felt about being my father's son artistically was self-imposed. Nobody else ever gave it to me. There were people make comments all the time when I was first starting. You're only in this business because of your father. You wouldn't be here without your father, And after I got finished standing on their chest and punching and screaming, I ended up having to draw anyway. And I was in my own mind, I wanted to be as good as my father. And if you're going to strive to be better or as good as someone, why not strive to be somebody that's great? So it was self-imposed, and yet it gave me a great incentive to work harder. I call my style the deadline style. Whatever comes out on time, that's my style. And that's the truth, because I've always been so greedy. You try and work fast enough to pay the bills and so on, and I want to own a certain car. And if nobody else in the industry says this, if they all think that it's an important medium, that's cool. But it's a money medium. You make money. It's part of the life. And at the time, I was getting paid nothing page-wise, just like everybody else that starts out. So you tend to work on speed. Excuse me. You tend to work with speed. That sounds terrible too. Speed is important to me. Drugs have nothing to do with this. The quicker you are, the more money you make. So I only developed a style as far as how quickly I could work. Whatever came out, that's all I was conscious of. I was never copying anybody else. I was trying to emulate my father, but that was impossible. You do anything every day for 26 years, 12 hours a day, you're gonna get good at it eventually. If there was a change in the way my artwork looked, it wasn't an effort. It just happened. And I hear that I have blocky looking characters and bulky looking characters. If that's the style, so be it. And if it's not consistent, again, I'm not conscious of it. So it might just be what I ate on a Sunday, and whatever comes out on Monday depends on what you eat over the weekend. Who knows? The greatest thing I think I have ever done to this point, if you can call it great, was working on Man Without Fear with Frank. And it was originally slated for 64 pages. So I started working on it. And I was thrilled to death working with Frank, because I had pretty much gotten into the business around the same time he did. And his work was just fantastic. And as a writer, it's even better than his artwork. And it started out 64 pages. I got about 40 pages done. He says, I got an addendum. He calls me up and he says, I have an addendum. I'll throw in a couple of pages, which ended up being 80-something pages. In between page 43 and 44, there was 80 more pages. And it ended up being 144 pages, this thing. He says, listen, you won't see Daredevil in costume till the end of the book. And I said, okay, let's go with it. And it was more fun and more rewarding than anything I ever did, because it was, if there was ever a weakness in my storytelling, even to that point, it was flushed out working on this, because you couldn't do anything but storytell in this. First thing is, as soon as the mortgage bill comes in the mail, my ass is just nailed to this spot. On a serious side, Jack Kirby said, sit down and do the work and then stop. You're basically working on commission. Ask any commissioned salesman or any commissioned worker in this world what it's like, knowing that if you don't work that day, you don't get paid. That's a scary feeling. And we don't get sick days because you work at home. You're supposed to be taking care of yourself. So I take the vitamins and I drink a ton of water. Although I do have to get up quite a few times during the day. When you drink a lot of water, you have to get up out of your desk.
When I break down a story, I look at a story as music. There was a scene in my Daredevil run with Kevin Smith, I believe it was after Karen Page sort of met her terrible demise, where Daredevil for a second really contemplated suicide. And I think I broke down those pages into like 24 panel grids or something. They were very, very tiny panels, but each one sort of had a rhythm to it. And by composing the panels in that sort of a small configuration, I also wanted to give this sense of prison bars, imprisonment, and very tight and claustrophobic surroundings. And what do? Time's running out. Life stinks. I got to get out of here. And what's the only way out? I got this gun at my feet. So those are the kind of things I try to add to the story, but ultimately I run instinctually when it comes to storytelling. I just do what I feel is right for the moment. My working relationship with Kevin Smith was probably one of the, I think to this day, it is the best collaboration I ever had with anybody. When Kevin was first approached by us to do this, he immediately said, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. And we were all gung-ho, and then it was like, the days were passing, and we weren't getting the scripts from Kevin. Kevin, where are the scripts? And, it took a call finally from my business partner at that time, Jimmy Palmiotti, to Kevin to say, dude, what the hell's wrong with you? Let's get the script and let's do this. And, it took me a couple of months to realize that the fear that Kevin was feeling. What if he writes a clunker, and people are going to perceive it in a multitude of terribly, horrifically negative ways. The movie industry is going to say, oh, look, he couldn't play in that little sandbox. And the people in the little sandbox are going to be like, oh, look at this big guy. He just couldn't cut it in our world. And the first story, the first issue of Daredevil that he wrote it in screenplay format. I just said, dude, just write it. Let me break it down for you. By about issue 4 and issue 5, Kevin nailed it. Karen Page's death, that was... That was a really interesting moment because Kevin and I had discussed having that happen. At this point, the Karen Page character had been through so much stuff. I mean, anybody who's familiar with Frank Miller's run, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but you can tell that character has been run through the mill. She will never be embraced by Mothers of America. So we felt, the character was sort of damaged to begin with. And we really wanted to have, there was a very poignant scene in Kevin's story where Karen's death could be very, very important to the ongoing saga of Daredevil. It had to be a big secret. And we knew that if we went out there and said there's a major death in Daredevil number 5, our sales would have gone through the roof. But we just said, you know what? Let's give the fans a real surprise. Let's not advertise this ahead of time. Let's just throw it out there and see what happens. So that was the first thing. It was going to be a big surprise, and we kept it a secret all the way until the book finally saw print. And number 2, we wanted it to be significant. So she had to die in a way that dead is dead. She's not coming back. Karen Page is not coming back to the Daredevil universe. And to this day, it's been pretty much upheld because of the fact that it was a significant death in the Marvel Universe. See, so it was Jimmy, it was myself, there was Ralph, there was Kevin, and Jimmy's girlfriend, Amanda Connor, who's also an artist, all contributed ideas at that point to make this scene. So it took about 5 people to sort of throw in little ideas here and there, and then Kevin took all that stuff and sewed it together into this incredible scene. When Kevin sent me the final script, I called him up and I said, okay, I'm a woman. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I cried. He's like, you are a woman. As editor-in-chief of Marvel right now, I'm responsible for a lot of the look, a lot of the way the books are, the overall look of the coloring, the kind of artists we hire, more importantly, the kind of writers that we look for, the way we tell our stories, and then the other part of this job, which I really wanted to sort of get a hold of. What made Marvel special was that Marvel had a public face when Stan Lee was here, okay? And in no way, by the way, am I ever comparing myself to Stan Lee, because Stan Lee's a mutant, okay? I just want you to know that, because he does have a superpower. And Stan's superpower is that if you ever met Stan, okay, you can meet him for 10 seconds, and he'll say, hey, how you doing? Put a hand on your shoulder, and you feel like you've known him forever. So Stan had that amazing mutant power. I don't have that. But what I do have is I have the internet at my disposal, and I have a big mouth, and I'm very opinionated. At Marvel, we're sort of like the hot-blooded Latin family. We're the Sicilians, you know what I mean? We're out there, and we're yelling at each other, and DC is very waspy. They're very proper, they're very dynasty, so to speak. And that's really the big difference between the two companies. And that was the other thing that I sort of wanted to reinstate, that there was this sort of like ridiculous detente between DC and Marvel for like the last few years, where they were doing crossovers, and they were doing this thing called amalgam, where they put their characters together, and it was like, oh God, it bored me to death. And I remember what was cool when I was growing up was the fact that it was DC or Marvel, man. You belonged to one gang or another. It's healthy to have kids at the store or at the bookstore, at the comic shop, wherever it may be, talking about it, and disliking one company or another or whatever, but they're buying everybody's books. But the important thing that matters, they're passionate about something. And if it's passionate about loving Marvel or not loving Marvel, that's great, because to me, being passive is just death.
Brian Bendis scripted the Daredevil story that I painted with him. And what I'll try to do is I'll try to make it so that it is indistinguishable, the writing from the drawing. So it's almost, in my mind I have to make it so that I almost don't draw distinctions from where one starts and another one begins, even with the lettering. The lettering is a part of the art, the type is part of the image, and the image tells the story. And that's the unique thing about comic books, is they're this fantastic hybrid medium. This is the old Royal typewriter that you saw Ben Urich use in the Daredevil story that I drew with Bendis writing. For a lot of my collage stuff, I save a lot of the things people send me or things that I find, and I end up somehow using it, in my work. People send me a lot of things. I get a lot of, this is where I keep all the fan mail. People send little boxes. This is, sometimes I'll paint something large, and then I'll reduce it and put it on a transparency, and then I can sort of collage it together with some other things. Try to make a nice contrast between how much is very specifically rendered and what's realistic, with the contrast of what's a little bit more ambiguous and abstract. Because when you're working on this, after a while you sort of realize if you make everything, if you give the audience 100% of everything, there's a certain point where they don't have to think about it anymore. So what I try to do is I try to give them just enough where they finish the idea in their mind. Writing and drawing and painting, that's the idea. The more you do that, the more you realize it's like a conversation with the reader. There's more of a give and take. There's a photo reference here. This is from the Daredevil story. It's me posing as Matt Murdock, and there's me as Ben Urich. There's Timmy. when the story opens up, there's this child, Timmy, who he's almost catatonic, and he's just sort of talking in comic book terms. Obviously something has happened in reality that he's not comfortable with, and so his only way of sort of handling it and being comfortable in it is talking about it and relating to the world as if he's a comic book hero. So we thought, well, how fascinating would it be if in Timmy's world, it's all Joe Quesada art. For the longest time, Joe said that, he's on it, and he thought it was a good idea, and he's going to draw these stories. Well, it turned out, with his editor-in-chief job, he just wasn't able to do the artwork in time. So Brian said, well, it doesn't matter, David's going to do it. And he just said, David, do these, just do Joe Quesada. He's like, you're going to do this, but you're going to draw it as if it's Joe. You got to make everybody believe these pages are Joe Quesada. The interesting thing about this story is that the central character, it turned out to be Ben Urich from the Frank Miller stories before, and from Born Again. We'd seen him get more and more of a role in some of the Frank Miller and Born Again stories. But this was a time where Brian was really able to give Ben the foreground and not look at him only on a superficial level. You got to see throughout the story Ben discovered why he does what he does, at the same time as the readers, do. When I'm in the middle of a book, what I'll end up doing is taking all the pages that I've completed so far, and I'll sort of, layer them around, the area that I work. And often I'll pull out some other tables that I'll have here, so I'm able to work on, an entire scene, several pages at one time, and I can see how they fit into the context of the rest of the story.
Frank Miller was on Daredevil around the time I was at my most formative and most impressionable age. He was just developing the cinematic style, and I was at this age where I was like craving just that thing. I was looking to be moved by comic art, and I'm coming from a world of George Perez and these other very mainstream but very stylized artists, and Miller's stuff was rougher and angrier, and it was an emotion I wasn't used to getting from a comic book. The issue where Elektra died, 181, which is, probably the best crafted issue, and also there's something that's very hard to do for us comic creators today, which is really keep the element of surprise. Then we were just turning the page and I'm like, oh my God, she's dead, and I care, and she's really dead. So it was violent, and it was disturbing, and I remember being shocked. I remember you throw it across the room like, oh my God, I have to sit down. So yeah, so those are very influential, and that feeling, that Daredevil 181 is what every single comic creator of my generation aspires to do. There's not any process to making a comic book that's the right way to make a comic. It's not screenwriting, and it's not poetry, and it's not narrative writing, and it's not pen and ink, and it's not photographs, it's not painting. It's all of these things. All of these things can make a comic. Anything that produces a sequential images that tells a story is how to make a comic. And anything you can do to visually or narratively express yourself makes a comic. So always put your character in the place they least like to be. So anytime I start an issue, I'm like, all right, where's the thing that, where's the place that Daredevil would least like to be? What's the biggest fear? And that's how we started this whole run that we're on right now, where Daredevil's been outed by the tabloids, because it just seemed to me that Daredevil had been very sloppy with his secret identity. People had read the comic book over the years, even way back in Miller's years. Every time any girl made Google eyes at Matt, he'd end up telling them he was Daredevil, and it was kind of to the point where it was funny, and then Kingpin found out he was Daredevil, and Foggy knew he was Daredevil, and every girl every year, everyone knew he was Daredevil, and no one was really doing anything about it. Even the Kingpin was going, well, now I got him where I want him. Meanwhile, I never did anything. And the world's so much more complicated than it was in the 60s. How hard would it be to keep a secret identity? Even think about that. How hard, and you can't, everything a celebrity does, and we all know those tabloid stories are true, everything they do, we find out about everything. There's videotape of everyone doing everything to anybody, right? So I go, here's the story of a modern society superhero. Let's really tell it and see how he deals with it. Let's see where Matt's character is. Well, what happened with that following artist is that artist became like superstar artist, and then it got into this weird area where the artist had totally taken over every aspect of the creation of the comic, and everything was big double-page spreads, and and tons of bats and flowing capes and chains, and there's a great tradition in comics of the splash page. You turn the page, and boom, there's the shot, and then it became every page was the boom, there's a shot, boom, there's a shot, boom. There's no story. It was just, and no matter how great the drawing is, if the comic is only about that drawing, it's a very shallow experience. I was actually working at a comic store during this period. I was in college, and I was working at a comic store, and people come up and not remember if they bought a particular issue, and it was like $5 an issue, and they'd be like, did I buy this? I'm like, wow, if I took $5 out and even slapped you, you'd remember. So, and I remember, well, they're not having any kind of experience. They're not, not a real experience. What we're in now is very writer oriented, and what you get there is, from the most basic level, what's attracting to the comic book is an idea or a series of ideas, and that's so much more captivating than a pinup.
When I was writing Guardian Devil, I killed off a character called Karen Page. Now, this was a character who nobody really cared about at that point in the books. I mean, A, nobody cared about Daredevil. It wasn't selling. And B, people didn't really care about Karen anymore. Daredevil had had affairs, of course, with Elektra and Typhoid Mary and, any number of chicks. He was kind of a pussy hound of sorts in the comics, which was another really kind of interesting aspect of his character that set him apart from most superheroes. So we killed her off, man, and you would have thought that we, killed Christ. It was insane, the kind of reaction people had to it, the bad reaction people had. How dare you kill off a character who's been around longer than you, that character's older than you. And it's like, hey man, nobody, cared about the character lately to begin with. But it proves that you should never go mucking with comics continuity. Boy, you tend to tick off people you didn't even know existed. When we were working on Guardian Devil, I had zero interest in touching Elektra. It was bad enough we were touching Daredevil, which, we'd all felt was Frank's character and will forever be Frank's character. So that was a dark enough, long enough shadow to kind of work in without having to bring Elektra into it as well. And I felt too that Frank had done, the Elektra Lives Again graphic novel, which nobody was ever sure whether it was canon or not, whether it was part of the continuity or not. But in that book, Elektra was very clearly dead. Elektra was Frank's character, unlike, Daredevil or the Kingpin, or even Bullseye. Frank created Elektra, it was his character. So Joe's position and my position as well was like, Frank says she's dead, she's dead. Frank killed her in one of his storylines, and that's that. I mean, it's one thing to go into the closet and put on your dad's clothes. It's another thing to fuck your dad's wife. And that's kind of what I felt like, about Elektra. It's one thing to go and play in the Daredevil universe, but then to add insult to injury and be like, I'm going to do Elektra too. No, forget it. The kind of interesting backstory or subplot involving his mother, Maggie, who kind of left him as a kid and apparently joined a convent. I mean, that was fantastic to me because, I was raised Catholic. So I was, oh my God, he's more or less, he's a Catholic superhero. He's not a dude going to church every Sunday and whatnot and receiving the host, but had a very, very Catholic streak running through him. But I really appreciated that and played with that a lot more in my storyline. Actually putting him into the confessional and whatnot. Really steeped it a bit more in Catholicism because it lent itself to it based on the work that had gone before. And I think the kind of Catholic angst, or the angst that comes along with being Catholic or raised Catholic, was quite obvious in that character and inherent to how powerful that character is or can be. I was in the midst, and still am in the midst of doing this Daredevil Bullseye Target book. The first issue came out, I wrote the first issue December 2001. And the book came out, 3 months ago, 2-3 months ago. And I still haven't even written issue 2. That's bad, that's horrible. And by the time this DVD comes out, God willing, it'll be done. Quesada said, well, nobody's going to do the Daredevil Bullseye story until you do it. I'm not going to let those two characters get together again unless you write it. I said, you don't make that. You don't want to say that. I mean, I'm flattered, but he's like, no, I promise. Says nobody's going to do it except you. Excuse me. So one day I read that Bendis is going to do that story at the culmination of one of his arcs. And I called up Quesada and I was just like, hey man, I guess somebody's doing that Daredevil Bullseye story. And he said, oh, I forgot. It's kind of a blunder on my behalf. And I was sorry that I called him up. I'm sorry now, I wasn't sorry then. Because at that time I was just like, you said it was me. And it was one of those things that in life where you get older and hopefully you mature as every day goes by. But it was more about keeping a dude to his word than it was me wanting to tell a story. And not the best way to go about a project, to go about any project. You never want to write a story unless you're inspired to write a story. You don't want to write it just because well, I should write it, right? Because the last time they met was on my watch and I should do the follow-up to it. So it was kind of a blunder, kind of a big blunder. And I wish I hadn't done it, but I did it. So now I have to finish Target because I took the character out of Brian's hands. But the thing that you really can't get across to a non-comic book reader or to the general public is what a fascinating and kind of layered character Daredevil is, and that's based on his internal monologues that the book has usually been famous for. What goes on in his head, the flaws. And that's not very simple as going like, this is a dude who wears a cape and a cowl and he fights a dude named the Joker. That's visually kind of interesting and it rises and falls right there. Daredevil, you can't just hold up a picture and get people excited. They have to kind of give it a test drive for themselves. Daredevil has always kind of been the Grateful Dead of comics, right? He's always had hardcore fans who'd follow him everywhere, anywhere, but he doesn't have the breakthrough playability of the Rolling Stones or the Beatles. So I think the movie will definitely break him through into the mainstream, hopefully for better, not for worse. And maybe that'll then bring a bunch of people in the comic book stores to go back and read some of the character-defining work that's made him such a great comic book character for years.